All right, well, the fallout from Russiagate has kind of become more of a pattern, and we're going to see more and more of this. I guess the death throes of the machine that tried to drive this for the past 2 years. The fact is that we're not going to see people wake up from this nonsense for a while. I actually I visited my dad, who's not, I wouldn't say he's a Russiagator, but he's certainly still a huge Democrat. And that's kind of one of the reasons that me and him don't really talk as much as many, family members do. But also, I don't have the greatest relationship with my dad. But in any case, I was there. I actually cracked a couple Russia jokes and started saying stuff in Russian, and he was kind of like didn't really want to talk about it. But the fact is that there are people who will always believe that there was some evidence. It was not uncovered by Mueller. Some evidence that must be out there that had been ignored just in order to protect Donald Trump. And now they're trying to turn against Bob Mueller, who, to be honest with you, I think that he was a villain in all of this, but not a villain in the same way that MSNBC thinks. I think for Robert Mueller to take this assignment in 2017 and then drag his feet for so long until finally Donald Trump appointed a different attorney general after Jeff Sessions, who would finally just tell him, cut the crap, I want the report, and I want it ASAP. That makes Robert Mueller a villain. We should have known probably within a few months whether Bob Mueller even had anything to show for what he was talking about, for what the media was talking about. And as a matter of fact, the Mueller report itself, at least according to the summary, seems to indicate that there's not even a shred of evidence that anybody colluded with Russia, meaning no one, not anybody who was an American citizen, concerning what they were talking about, skewing the 2016 election. So this is something I actually saw Tim Pool did kind of overview of this, which was pretty cool. And it says, it goes into a lot of this stuff about how pathetic Rachel Maddow is, and it's notable because this is Slate, and they go into a lot of, they go and they slam not just Rachel Maddow but Sean Hannity because they're far left anyway. And Slate was trying to say, well, it's deranged factual interpretations, claiming that Hannity is completely off his rocker because there are theories that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an actress. By the way, I think her name, it's Alexandria, right? It's not Alexandra. So they misspelled her name. So she's an actress, not a congresswoman. There's a theory out there put forward by Mr. Reagan on YouTube, and it's not that far-fetched of a theory that she wasn't really an earnest activist, that she actually responded to a casting call. Okay, and you know what? If people think that that's such a ridiculous theory, they have to look at the fact that Cortez, or Ocasio-Cortez, she insists that you have to say both of her last names. Okay, so if you watch any of her appearances on committees, usually you'll see her when she's questioning a witness reading directly from cue cards. She can't directly talk to people as if she can't speak extemporaneously in a committee. Okay, if she did, she would run into even more gaffes than she does. And then they also say the Mueller investigation is an attempted deep state coup. So they consider that a conspiracy theory. But the fact is, so they're calling this the Howard Bealization or Glenn Beckification of Rachel Maddow, because now that it's been revealed that these people can't really get over the hill and down it over this Russiagate thing. they're finally realizing, well, we have to cut ties with these people. And Rachel Maddow is going to be in a very lonely place if she continues and persists with this nonsense, because the fact is that people are moving on from Russiagate. The Russia hysteria has not really given much new legs to any sort of movement that would dethrone Donald Trump. Okay, because if you remember, back in 2017, there was march after march after march. There was the march for the Women's March, and then there was the March for Science, and God knows what else. Eventually, that ran out of steam, and then there was, of course, the Parkland shooting, which gave kind of a brief shot in the arm, if you pardon the pun. Shot in the arm, by the way, means a kind of an inoculation. It has nothing to do with firearms. So, pardon me for those of you that are sensitive about gun violence, but the Parkland shooting, it gave kind of a small impetus to more people to protest against Trump. That was called the March for Our Lives. And, there were other landmark events such as Charlottesville or whatever. And those were all used by the media in order to portray Donald Trump in a negative light, when in reality, all of those things, which were at least a little bit more close to home, which at least you could make the case that they were relevant and could be, construed as something, that was important to to the everyday lives of Americans. All of those things fizzled out as well. Why is it that they continue to persist with Russia, which is in many cases, not only is it something that is pissing off people who are already Trump supporters, but it's also alienating people that are on the left. It's alienating people. Glenn Greenwald is a journalist who is very much, he's so far to the left that he's I believe he's married he's first of all, he's married to another man. So, but he's married to a Brazilian member of parliament, a deputy in the Brazilian parliament, who is a communist, and he's alienated from Rachel Maddow. A lot of people who are on the more ideological left are completely tired with her because they never really wanted to have a confrontation with Russia at all. And so you're going to see people, and I might do more videos on this because I don't care if this is getting oversaturated. I think this topic's very interesting. I think the whole Russiagate investigation is very interesting. And I do listen to the Bongino podcast, at least a few times a week, just to stay, properly updated about it, as well as the Hard News Network. But when I see, first of all, there's other angles that you could take at it. It's not just Rachel Maddow. You have people who are part of the so-called Never Trump movement, who were, they called themselves conservatives for many, many years. Bill Kristol and people like, Max Boot, and those people, they've gradually burnt their own houses down in their just this zeal to bust the Trump movement and return conservatism to what they call the legitimate conservatives, people like themselves. They see themselves as the guardians of the flame of what conservatism was, but in reality, they don't have any accomplishments to show for it. They're mostly people who are pro-war, Bush administration supporting, members of the establishment who are for open borders. They're not actual people who believe in any principles of the conservative movement, as has been demonstrated by, they don't give Donald Trump credit for many of the things that are huge conservative accomplishments. His support for the pro-life movement, Donald Trump's appointments to the Supreme Court. If you look at Donald Trump's actions with regards to the border, if you look at some of his actions, and these are things that they are very much in favor of in general, but now apparently they don't count for anything. So his policies in the Middle East, with respect to Israel, for example, many of these people were, what else would they want? how much more would you be able to give them for them to finally admit that they don't know what the hell they don't have anything that would satisfy them? So the Never Trump movement has definitely been completely defanged and rendered impotent, and nobody's going to be paying attention to them for the foreseeable future. I think in many cases their careers are over. So let's look at some of these issues specifically with the House Intelligence Committee, with Russiagate, and we'll start. I think I've started to see the signs of the Russiagate peddlers. Their careers are are pretty much on the ropes. They have very little left to keep them afloat.
Your willingness to continue to promote a demonstrably false narrative is alarming. The findings of the special counsel conclusively refute your past and present assertions and have exposed you as having abused your position to knowingly promote false information, having damaged the integrity of this committee and undermined the faith in the United States government and its institutions. Your actions, both past and present, are incompatible with your duty as chairman of this committee, which alone in the House of Representatives has the obligation and authority to provide effective oversight of the U.S. intelligence community. As such, we have no faith in your ability to discharge your duties in a manner consistent with your constitutional responsibility and urge your immediate resignation as chairman of the committee.
My colleagues may think it's okay that the...
So, in case that wasn't clear enough, the Republican members of the House Intelligence Committee are calling on Adam Schiff to resign. So this is Schiff's response, which I'm glad C-SPAN at least put together a more condensed clip, because he went on and on and on and on and on.
Russians offered dirt on a Democratic candidate for president as part of what was described as the Russian government's effort to help the Trump campaign. You might think that's okay. My colleagues might think it's okay that when that was offered to the son of the president, who had a pivotal role in the campaign, that the president's son did not call the FBI. He did not adamantly refuse that foreign help. No, instead, that son said that he would love the help of the Russians. You might say that's all okay. You might say that's just what you need to do to win. But I don't think it's okay. I think it's immoral. I think it's unethical. I think it's unpatriotic. And yes, I think it's corrupt and evidence of collusion. Now, I have always said that the question of whether this amounts to proof of conspiracy was another matter. Whether the special counsel could prove beyond a reasonable doubt the proof of that crime would be up to the special counsel, and I would accept his decision, and I do. He's a good and honorable man, and he is a good prosecutor. But I do not think that conduct, criminal or not, is okay. And the day we do think that's okay is the day we will look back and say that is the day America lost its way.
Yeah, that was an insane statement, and the Republicans didn't let him get away with it either. And
Is it?
The fact is that some of the best moments from this hearing were kind of lost in the shuffle. And I did watch most of the rest of the hearing. By the end, it was mostly garbage, and they were repeating themselves. But Adam Schiff is ignoring a very basic fact that, of course, why would he go into this? But it's something that you should all remember, okay? Hillary Clinton, during the campaign, also, the source of the Russian collusion narrative was from Russian intelligence, and some of the stuff actually came from the Ukraine as well. And there is a pending, prosecution going on in the Ukraine against Ukrainian officials for stepping in and meddling in the U.S. election on behalf of the Hillary Clinton campaign. So Adam Schiff is talking out of both sides of his mouth. The fact is that the candidate that he liked lost, and he's just bent out of shape about it. And he wants to, in order to vent his own frustration, he's continuing to peddle lies and innuendo in order to bring down an administration with whom he has nothing in common. And I'll bring this. This is one of the committee members, Will Hurd, who I don't like that much because first of all, he is a former CIA officer, which is, in my opinion, is enough to basically call into question his own credibility. Okay, he's also basically an open borders guy. He voted against the wall. He is, for all intents and purposes, he is a corporate Republican. I'm not trying to say that he can't have his own opinions. I'm just saying I don't really agree with many of them. But we're going to hear from him. We're going to hear from another mainstream Republican, Kevin McCarthy, and I'll tell you the significance of what they're saying now.
Is stop with the innuendo, stop with abusing our position and implying we have access to something that we do not have access. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I would only mention that to my colleague that in the last session, the majority produced a report that suggested to the American people that the intelligence community's conclusion that Russia had intervened, and in fact intervened to help one candidate and hurt the other, should be subject to doubt. That the intelligence community didn't use the proper tradecraft, that conclusion should be called into question. I don't think that was in the service of the country. I don't think that's reflected in any of the intelligence. I don't think that's going to be reflected in Bob Mueller's report. And that was the unanimous opinion of the then majority. Every member of this panel who was a part of that signed that report. And I fully concur, Mr. Hurd, that we need to be very clear about Russian intervention. We need to all condemn it on a bipartisan basis. We should show no daylight in that. We'll never know whether that intervention was decisive in the election. I've never suggested it was. We don't know, and our intelligence community, though the president has represented that that's what they concluded, that's not their job, and of course that wasn't their conclusion. It's beyond their role and their capability to predict election outcomes. Ambassador McFall?
Would the gentleman yield to
yes.
Is it normal within the Directorate of Intelligence, or I guess it's now the Directorate of Analysis, for a senior analyst involved in a subject matter to be excluded from the review of all source intelligence on that subject?
Mr. Hurd, you and I can carry on this conversation, or we can ask the experts whether they have any reason to question the intelligence community's assessment that the Russians intervened on one side and not the other. Shall we put it to the witnesses?
I doubt they will have the opportunity to speak on classified materials, but I would love to talk about the process on how intelligence has been developed and how all source intelligence should be developed. And again, there is no question about the ICA assessment about the Russians' attempt to influence our elections. But tradecraft, standards of tradecraft are standards of tradecraft. And when there is a deviation from that standard of tradecraft, we should understand why.
So understand before we go in, so there's not that much left for this clip, but essentially what Will Hurd is saying is, look, yes, the intelligence community did put forward an assessment, the ICA as they call it, Intelligence Community Assessment, alleging that Russia did intervene in order to affect the 2016 election. But the fact is that the methods under which they performed that assessment are not really clear. The waters are kind of muddied, and the intelligence community has never really, they've never explained how they arrived at that conclusion.
Mr. Castro, you are up next. If you'll indulge me, let me ask the witnesses, does anyone on this panel question the intelligence community's finding that the Russians intervened in our election and did so for the purpose of helping one candidate and hurting the other?
Would the gentleman yield to add an additional question?
I'd like to allow the witnesses to answer. Does anyone question that? Ms. Conley?
No, I do not question it.
Ambassador?
No
Mr.
question.
Hall? Mr. Lorber? Mr. Castro, you're recognized.
So to give a little more context here, the people who are on the witness stand, okay, you have on the left is a woman from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which is kind of a U.S. interventionist think tank that they work in countries that we're hostile to in order to support organizations that promote democracy, supposedly. But in reality, I have a lot of criticisms for the FDD, FDD, I think they're called. A lot of people on the left do as well. I think that in reality, what they often do is to promote the interests of our defense establishment overseas, and in many cases in areas where, I mean, what are we can't just force other countries to adopt our system. That's not really the spirit of our foreign policy as it was conceived by the founders. We're not supposed to be the world's police, and that's what the FDD does. The person, and the Ambassador McFaul was the Obama administration ambassador to Russia for 2 years, from 2012 to 2014. Those were the years when Putin was actively defying the U.S. and encroaching into Crimea. And the Obama administration did nothing about it. They were very weak on that front. Okay. Now, the fact is that I don't think we should be very much involved in what's going on in Eastern Europe and the Russian frontier at all. But these people are accusing the Trump administration of being weak, when in reality, under President Obama, Putin and Russia got a lot stronger. They were able to kind of spread their wings and fly, so to speak. Then you have the CIA station chief in Moscow, Mr. Stephen Hall. So no, I think that this entire hearing was based around letting these witnesses propagate this whole fantasy that Russia is this great threat to the rest of the world, when in reality, there's always been a sort of threat from Russia, but it doesn't override the idea that we're going to have to manage that threat through diplomacy. We're going to have to manage that threat through sort of kind of creative realpolitik. That's the way we did it during the Cold War, and unfortunately, people like the members of this panel of witnesses are the type of people who have dragged us back into a Cold War.
Mr. Lorber? Mr. Castro, you're recognized.
Mr. Castro, would the gentleman yield for 20 seconds, please, sir?
Sure.
I would welcome the gentleman asking the question if any of the panelists knew how the ICA was developed and whether their understanding of the process on which it was vetted through the intelligence agency. And I yield back.
I can give an answer there. I'll let him answer your question.
I have no knowledge of the process.
Neither do I.
I have no direct knowledge, but it would be difficult for me to imagine that the heads of the intelligence organizations would stand up and vouch for it if there were not some integrity to it, but that's speculation on my part.
Likewise, I have no knowledge of the process.
So these are people that, sorry, you guys keep seeing the same feed videos. I don't know why this Alex Jones one keeps coming up, but although I love me some Alex Jones.
I also want to note that today.
But the fact is, and we'll get to this Kevin McCarthy clip, but Will Hurd exposed the fact that the witnesses on the panel, as much as they want to talk about how awful Russia is and how Russia is basically intervening and causing all this chaos, none of these people can actually articulate what went on and what went into that intelligence assessment. And it's basically as if they're saying, well, we want to hold our country's foreign policy hostage and our political leadership hostage by virtue of a process we have no actual personal experience with. So that's what's being exposed, that the entire presumption of Russian domination and interference is based almost entirely on processes that have been hidden from the public and hidden even from these so-called experts. So here's House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who I also think is a corporate Republican. He did nothing to help build the wall in the previous session of Congress. He was one of the foot draggers. He's one of those people who's been part of the GOP establishment for so many years. He's one of the type of people that I don't really, he's the type of person who makes me not want to belong to the Republican Party or to any political party. But let's see the sea change that's been going on.
Today was the second public hearing of the House Intelligence Committee. What the American people didn't hear at the top of the hearing was any sense of apology from the chairman. We all know his conduct for the past 2 years. What's ironic, when Mueller presented his report on March 22nd, it was the 2-year anniversary of the lie that Chairman Schiff made, that he had proof. On March 22nd, 2017, then Ranking Member Adam Schiff told the American public, "I can tell you that the case is more than that, and I can't go into any particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now." March 2019, he said, "A growing body of evidence of obstruction of justice." Just this month, he said this. In February of 2019, ample evidence of collusion. I think that there's plenty of evidence of collusion or conspiracy in plain sight. March 2018, Dim's report will show the facts supporting the issue of collusion. In May of 2017, there is evidence of collusion. All Americans should be concerned with the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee taking the position of judge and jury and perpetuating false information to the American people for the last 2 years. Today in that hearing, every single Republican signed a letter that this chairman, they have lost confidence. They do not believe, no matter what they work on, that the American public can trust him. This is not a committee that's set by a steering committee. One person alone decides who sits on that committee for the Democrat, and one person who decides on the Republican side, me. It's now up to Nancy Pelosi to remove Chairman Schiff. We need to restore the trust in the Intelligence Committee, the work of the national security, the idea that you would have a chairman of a committee of this nature, the work that is involved in this committee, that would lie to the American public, not apologize, but use the tactics of Senator Joe McCarthy to attack his own members. There's nothing that could come from this committee that can be trusted. It is time to turn the page. The Democrats have wasted their majority. They said you have to show a budget to show values, but now they won't even do a budget. They allow a person who lies to us to be a head of an intel committee. Does America truly believe, or does Adam Schiff truly believe he knows something more than Mueller? That 40 FBI agents, 19 attorneys, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 witnesses, looking into 13 different countries and saying no collusion at all? He needs to resign from the committee.
So what McCarthy did there is something that a good public speaker would do. Okay, and again, I don't really like Kevin McCarthy. I don't think his leadership has been great, and he's only been Republican leader for a few months, but he's part of the same group as Paul Ryan, and he would have been Paul Ryan's handpicked successor. But this is a skillful use of language here, because he's not going and calling Adam Schiff out for being a lunatic and part of the intelligence establishment that did fabricate all those lies. Okay, and he could have, but he did this in a more sneaky way. Okay, a sneaky way that's also correct, by saying that, look, you have all the time waited and given this tremendous weight to the Mueller report and to Bob Mueller himself, and attacked the president for attacking the Mueller report. And now that he's come out with his findings, which are based on all of this, all of these pieces of evidence and interviews and various other investigative pieces of material, now you're going to claim that, well, you have evidence, there's plenty of evidence of collusion or anything. What do you know that Robert Mueller wouldn't know? And that's a great question. And I think this is the type of question that appeals to people who are from, the big middle, where they're not committed to one side or the other. And it's something that Adam Schiff isn't going to be able to do in the future because he's clinging to something that has very little substance to it.
Let me open it up for questions. Yes, sir.
Leader, given the political or the cause for Adam Schiff to resign, and given the problems that Democrats had with Devin Nunes last year, maybe you and the Speaker get together and agree that your top members on the Intelligence Committee should just quit together? I mean, there were all those issues with Congressman Nunes the last 2 years when he was in charge.
And didn't the Mueller report justify exactly what Chairman Nunes has said? I think Chairman Nunes comes out on top. The concerns that he had with what was being said, what was being done, was just proven correct. There is a difference here drastically. One member lied to the American public. One member told the truth and was attacked for it. Now that the truth is told that Chairman Nunes was correct, and where truth is told that Adam Schiff lied to the American public, continued to lie up until March of this year. Now, I think Speaker and I should get together and remove Schiff. She doesn't need me to get together with her to do it. She can do it today. And you know what? I removed a member from our own committees. This is what Adam Schiff has done, lying to the American public, and he is chairman of the Intel Committee. This is the committee that sees things that the majority of members do not get to know. How can you trust that individual? He has an entire one side of the committee that has no trust in him at all. How can he research anything? How can we stand up against our enemies and trust what is being done if Adam Schiff lied to us for 2 years? How can their own Democrats stand behind what he says? He didn't even apologize. Does he think he knows more than Mueller? Yes.
So this is a lot of grandstanding. It's a lot of good, this is somebody who knows how to speak to reporters and kind of guide a conversation. Not all of it, I guess, is fair. I mean, look, I agree with him as far as the Devin Nunes issue. I think Devin Nunes did basically yeoman's work when he was the head of the committee. I think Devin Nunes has been completely vindicated. But the fact is that I don't really agree with what Kevin McCarthy is saying, because I would say that the Mueller investigation itself was a complete farce. It was a joke. Mueller should have never been appointed or anything. But at this point, what Kevin McCarthy is doing is kind of the type of leadership that the Republican Party, I guess, would need. You need somebody who is not too much of a Trump acolyte to be putting out that message. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, the Republicans are generally united behind people like McCarthy, the Republicans in the House. They're not as united around Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and the other House Democratic leadership. And what we're going to see coming up in the next year and a half is we're going to see a huge fracturing of the House Democrats, in my opinion. We were already seeing that with regards to the AIPAC issue with Ilhan Omar, but there's other issues. There's a Green New Deal. There's some centrist Democrats that aren't comfortable with the way the House leadership is going, and they'll probably vote with the Republicans on a few issues. And the Democrats are going to have a sort of a difficult time holding on to their majority in 2020 in the House. So that's about it. Please like, share, subscribe. You can find me on minds.com @Chef Leopard. You can find me on BitChute, Chef Leopard. You can find me on Gab at Starscream85. And anything else, I'll try to put it in the links in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys this Sunday. Have a great weekend.